With the clicker. Okay, well, thanks for that introduction, Amanda. And hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here today. I'm really excited and grateful to be the first presenter in the IRES seminar back in person. Today, I'll be presenting to you my project that is part of my master's thesis titled Crop Species Diversity Changes in Mexico. I want to start with a positionality statement. I was born and raised in Mexico City up until I was 22 years old when I moved to Vancouver to do my master's. I acknowledge that, I identify myself as a Latin American woman, but I acknowledge that I'm conducting, and even though I'm conducting research about my own country, I know that I'm doing so from a privileged position and from a global North university. As I just mentioned, I was born in one of the biggest cities in the world, and therefore I was never in direct contact with agriculture. However, I was in direct contact with the massive changes that were undergoing in the Mexican agricultural sector. For instance, at my school cafeteria, we as kids have access to a diversity of products that the school will sell for lunch. But most of these products were highly processed foods and with very little nutritional content in them. I was privileged enough to have a balanced diet because after school, I will go to my grandma's house and have a proper meal made most of the time out of steamed vegetables, tortillas, chicken, and some good salsa. However, little did I know that all this nutritional quality of my diet came from other major external changes, like the country opening to free trade, an ongoing urbanization, and the crops that farmers were deciding to plant. So crop species diversity is defined as the number and abundance of different crop species grown within a geographic area. And this can be studied at multiple levels and at multiple systems. And depending on which level we decide to study, we're gonna have different results and implications. So at the farm level, studies have found that crop species diversity, or CSD, enhances ecosystem services and productivity, and it's also related to the nutritional quality of diets. At the regional and national levels, crop species diversity has been found to provide stability and adaptive capacity to major changes like climate change or market changes. And it's also been associated with agricultural intensification. And actually a study in 2019 found that crop species diversity can be as important as irrigation in stabilizing national yields. And then finally, at the global level, CSD has also been found it has increased at national levels, but this has caused an homogenization of diets. Some of the factors that influence CSD are urbanization, trade, land access and technology, and the environment. Mexico is a highly urban country. Today, around 81% of the people live in urban areas. In terms of trade, Mexico plays an important role in the international trade system because 15% of the food crop species that the world consumes have their origin in Mexico. In terms of land access and technology, the agricultural sector has undergone multiple revolutions from the 1920s with the Mexican Revolution, and then the Green Revolution in the 60s that was more about technology and new inputs for farmers to improve their yield. And then some neoliberal policies in the 90s. And one of the staple examples of one of these neoliberal policies was the signing of the North American Free Trade Agreement, or also called NAFTA. And also, of course, the environment. Mexico is very geographically heterogeneous, and this will influence on the foods that it grows and how they grow them. So my research questions are, how has crop species diversity changed in Mexico through space and time? Are regions within Mexico diversifying or specializing? And have the similarities or differences between regions changed over time? So for my methods, first, I wanna exemplify how we're thinking about diversity in terms of crop species diversity. So here we have 3 different regions, region A, B, and C. And what you can see here is that richness in both region A and region B is the same. Richness equals 5 because each of these regions are growing 5 different crops. However, region A is a perfectly even region because all the crops are using the same amount of area, whereas in region B, wheat is occupying most of the space. Therefore, it's a highly uneven region. And then for region C, we have that richness is higher because it's growing 10 different crop species, and it's moderately even because not all of the crops are occupying the same space. Oh, and also we can think of diversity within regions, which is what we call alpha diversity, but also diversity between regions, which is what we call beta diversity. So for my data, I used data coming from the Food and Fisheries Information Service. I used harvested area of 47 crop species, and I had data at the study level from 1980 to 2016. For the grouping part, I did grouped the 32 states in the country into 5 different regions based on the different geographic and climatic conditions of each of these regions. So for instance, the northern regions are characterized by a more drier climate. Therefore, they have a heavier reliance on irrigation systems, and it's characterized by large-scale agriculture. Whereas the south region, it has a more tropical climate, and most of the agriculture here is small-scale agriculture. And then the central region is a mix of everything in terms of climate. It's more a template climate, and the farms are from small to medium to large-scale farms, and it relies both on irrigation and rain-fed systems. And then for the crop species, the institution where I got the data from reports around 200 crop species, but I grouped them into 47 based on the FAO commodity crop list. So to measure alpha and beta diversity, I calculated different diversity indices. I did richness, effective number of crop species, which is a transformation of the popular and widely used Shannon index. And I calculated evenness, or also called Pilus J. I fitted some simple linear models using just a function of diversity as a function of time. And I did a breakpoint analysis when the simple linear models were not a good fit to explain diversity and its changes through time. And then to measure beta diversity, I used a non-metric multidimensional scaling, which is a type of ordination technique that is used to compare the differences between regions through space and time. Then moving on to my results, I want to start with the harvested area in each of the regions. So at the national level, there hasn't been a significant expansion in terms of harvested area. This has fluctuated of around 16 million hectares since 1980. But there has been a significant increase when we look at it at the regional level. So for the South, this increase has been around 26,000 hectares per year. And now for this visualization I have here, this is showing you how crop diversity has changed through time, how crops are occupying a different amount of space as time goes by. So this is showing from 1980 to 2016, how at the national level, the abundance of each of these different crops that were grown in the country look like. So first thing to notice is, of course, that maize is the most abundant crop in the country, occupying around 35% of the total area, followed by other staple crops like maize, sorghum, and wheat. And then I also want to drag your attention to the groups of fruits. So all the fruits are colored in yellow. And what you notice here is that now we're around the year 2002, and fruits are starting to occupy more area in the country. And in fact, fruits have increased by around 113%. And in the case of vegetables, this has been around an increase of 212%. So that was at the national level, but when we look at it at the regional level, we see some different patterns. One pattern that we see across all regions is that fruits, vegetables, and sugars significantly increased over time. But if we look at the central region, for instance, we see that some small crops like potatoes and some oil crops decreased, while oranges, and which are again colored in yellow, increased by around 4,000 hectares per year. Then in the central west region, what we see is that, does this thing have a pointer thing? Like a light, like. Oh, okay, there we go. So here we see that these staple crops are declining over time. So these are maize, sorghum, and beans. And they're being, we could say, replaced by these others, which are fruits and vegetables. And then for the Northeast region, we see a high decrease of maize through time of around 15,000 hectares per year. However, we see that this maize has decreased here. It's almost the same amount that has increased in the South region. And then for the Northwest region, we see also some declines of oil crops, and this oil crops decrease wasn't canceled with any other increase somewhere else. So oil crops in general have been decreasing, except for palm oil, which palm oil has increased both in the South region and in the Central region. So moving on to the diversity indices and how these have changed through time, we see here that in every region, richness has significantly increased. At the Central region in particular, which is the richest region, it has also increased. However, when we look at it in this other graph, in the middle one, we see that ENCS, our effective number of crop species, is diversity for the Northwest region is going down. One other thing to notice here is the high variability of diversity for this region. And if you remember, this was one of the most industrialized regions in the country. Then the next regions show also both an increase in richness and also an increase in effective number of crop species. And this is a significant increase for these three regions. The only region where there is no significant increase and diversity stayed stable is the South region. However, as you can see here, the R-square value for this region is 0.1. Therefore, we wanted to find a way to better fit the data for that particular region. And so that's why we did the breakpoint analysis. And the breakpoint is just a type of segmented regression. So what it does is it takes the previous linear regression and it divides it into two. And so here it's using, instead of just like one linear regression, it has two linear regressions, and it found the division in 1998, or the division is also called the breakpoint. In the case of the South region, is 1998. In the case of the Central region, is 1994. And as you can see here, also our square value improved from 0.1 to 0.6. And then the final part of my results is the Nmds analysis. So what this is showing is how beta diversity, this is how similar regions are between each other and through space. So I can explain further if you have questions about how this technique works. It's similar maybe to principal component analysis, if people are more familiar with that. But the thing that this is doing is just comparing the different regions through time. And so the main takeaway from this here is that regions are very different from each other because they all are clustered together into a different space within this graph. And then when we add the year component to this graph, this is added with these ellipses. And what the ellipses are doing is, or saying, is that the bigger the ellipse, the more different regions are, and the smaller the ellipse, the closer together regions are. This means the more similar regions are. So as you can see here, the bigger ellipses are all like the ones from 1980 to 1990. And then they start to become smaller, meaning that regions are, the diversity within or between regions is becoming more similar over time. So just a summary of all those results that we just saw is that diversity has increased in 4 out of the 5 regions. Diversity has also decreased in the highly industrialized Northwest region, which means that there are more crops, but it's less even. And then the region is also now specializing in maize, wheat, sorghum, fruits, and vegetables. And also the changes in the South are better explained by a breakpoint in the 90s and also a sharp increase of maize, coffee, and sugar area. Then CSD is also different in every region through space and time. And then the final result is that regions are becoming more similar through time. And so what are the implications of all of this? Well, first of all, it's important to consider the specific crops involved when assessing the effect of changes in crop diversity. Because as we just saw, like there's an increase of fruits and vegetables, which could add diversity to diets. And like, of course, they always tell us that eating fruits and vegetables is a good thing for your health. But there's also an increase of sugars, for instance. One other thing is, well, when we think about these implications in terms of environmental implications, fruits fruits mainly are also perennial crops, meaning that they are planted for longer periods of time, which can also have more impacts or negative impacts on the environment. And then, for instance, for crops that are not suited for certain regions, so if fruits are increasing in the North region, which is a dry region, that could also make the region even more water stressed. One other main and obvious implication is the deforestation that is especially happening in the South. And the South is not only characterized by this small-scale agriculture, but it's also one of the most biodiverse regions in the country. In terms of some social implications, the diversity of diets, if the fruits and vegetables and all these new crops are adding to the diversity of diets, it's important to know whether these foods are staying within the country or if it's mostly for export. And it's not something that I've done in my analysis, but we could assume that a lot of this motivation to plant these new crops are related to the influence of trade in the country. And then just one other thing is how for traditional systems, for instance, there has been, with this crop species diversity, there could be a displacement or replacement of traditional crop systems with high value and intensive crops. But of course, all these implications in terms of economical implications at the end are good for the country and also at the regional level, but also at the farm level for the farmers that are planting these new crops. Some of the limitations that I had is that I didn't add the animal feed data. That this was excluded from my analysis because the data was just low quality. However, it's important to acknowledge that livestock and feed crops have had a big increase in the country and is the top land use. As part of some of my future work, this is just a preliminary result of the municipal level data that I'm using to find hotspots of increasing crop species diversity, and this will be at the national level. And it will be also worthwhile to incorporate or relate this data with trade data, production data, and also nutritional content data. And here are some of my references. And thank you so much.
All right, I think we're going to take some questions. I'm going to help moderate. As is tradition in IRES seminar, we like to make sure our first couple of questions are from students or other early career scholars. So for any faculty, we can hold on to your question after we get the first few. So question.
Oh.
You can just tell them on Zoom that we're ready for questions.
We're ready for questions since someone didn't hear that.
All right, questions from the room or from the Zoom?
Should I repeat that question on Zoom, maybe? Niall asked what were the results or what were the results that most shocked me or surprised me about all of this. That's a good question. I guess in general, when I first started doing this research, I was assuming that the South region was going to be the most diverse region because of all the things that we know about that region. That is like where former Mesoamerica was, and it's also a high biodiverse region. And I guess this result of the crop species diversity not being as high in the region. It took me a while to understand it, but that's why it's important to understand that diversity can be studied at multiple levels and at multiple systems, and this will also like yield like different implications. So it's not the same to have a highly biodiverse region versus having a region that is growing a lot of crops, because as we just saw in the South region, that hasn't been a really good thing. No, sorry, Luis is there.
And then the faculty. And thank you for your positionality statement. Could you speak more to the breaking point?
Yes. Yeah, I think I skipped that for some reason. But yeah, what this is showing for, on Zoom, I'm gonna, like Sarah Louise just asked about the breakpoint analysis. And this is what this is showing is that for the South region, diversity was decreasing actually decreasing from 1980 to 1998. But after 1998, it started increasing again. And so that's why like finding all these breakpoints in the 90s. So here, just for like visualization purposes, I'm just showing Central and South, but I did the analysis for all the regions, and for all the regions, all the breakpoints were in the 90s, meaning that it could be related to some external factor, such as neoliberal policies, we think, or NAFTA, the signing of the NAFTA agreement, that pushed this increase.
Sounds like we have time for
another question from the other way. Why this breakpoint happened?
Yeah, well, I hope I answered that.
just a quick time check. Do we have time for one more question or? No. Well, then perfect timing. Thanks to everyone let's give a round of applause for Erika. Oh yeah, I forgot. I am very fortunate today actually to introduce both